Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated podcast, where we take animation seriously. We provide fan-oriented and analytic discussions on a variety of animated shows, movies, and anime. Currently featuring Steven Universe, Star Wars Force of Evil, New Powerpuff Girls, and Samurai Jack, among others. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Delaney Stovall.
Hey, y'all.
Today, Delaney and I will be having a Steven Universe topic discussion in our potential continued off-season ? Discussing, who knows what's happening with that. We're discussing Steven's new powers, season 3 powers, and the potential negative implications of these powers. This is a roundtable topic we've had on the potential list for a while. Specifically last summer of Steven, we've gotten a lot of stuff with Steven jumping into people's minds and dreams, and it's like this might not be so good. So that's basically our discussion here. We're going to go over our recently the abilities of Steven that we've recently learned, and think about, like, why does he have this power, what's going on here, and could this be a negative, maybe, rather than a positive, even though we haven't really seen a lot of these be a positive, to be honest. So we discuss Steven Universe hopefully every week here in the Overly Animated podcast. You can check us out at overlyanimated.com, subscribe to us at overlyanimated.com/iTunes, and so if you're listening on YouTube, subscribe there. Find all those links at our website. So let's get into this powers discussion. So we're going to be referencing the Steven Universe Wikia Steven Universe (character) article, and there's a lot of powers listed on here. I don't know if a lot of them aren't relevant to us, I think, but I'm going to focus on the new stuff, and we're going to go through these. So I want to start with the telepathy stuff, because this is, I think, the most emblematic of this topic. This topic is the headline is Steven can jump into people's minds. I don't know about that. So let's read this. Empathetic telepathy. In Horror Club, Steven is able to sense the lighthouse gem monster's presence as well as its emotional state. In Chill Tide, Steven can communicate with gems through dreams. Yes, we know that. Gem Drill. Okay, so Kiki's pizza delivery service, he goes into the dream. That's the most explicit demonstration of the dream jumping power in Kiki's pizza delivery service. He also, I think there's 3 parts of the Steven mind stuff. He can jump into dreams, as shown in Kiki's pizza delivery service. He can mind link with things, as shown in Super Watermelon Island, when he mind links with the Watermelon Steven. And then he can body swap with people, as shown in the new Lars. So these are that's a lot of stuff. So I think our reaction when a lot of this came up, Delaney, was like, this seems random.
Yes, and like terrifying.
Yeah. Why do you think? How do you think this relates to, like, Steven as a person, if at all? And, like, do you think it's, like, randomly presented in the show?
I think, like, when it comes up, it's really random. Like, the fact, when this happens, we're like, what? It makes sense, like, given Steven's, like, personality. He is very empathetic. He, like, cares a lot about people, and he, like, wants to help. And so it makes sense that he was, like, would be, like, an empath. Like, if he was, like, a superhero, oh, maybe he's an empath. That makes sense. That's, like, that doesn't shock me at all. And it's just kind of confusing going with, like, the gym thing, because, like, he's gym and human, and as we're going to get into more, talking about some of the other things he can do, like, we haven't really seen a lot of diversity in what the gyms can do. Like, we haven't really, like, we know, like, Pearl can have, like, her little hologram, and Garnet can see the future. And, like, these are, like, variable things, but, like, Steven can do a lot, and at least it seems in comparison to the rest of the crystal gems, which is, like, really weird and confusing. And granted, it's also, maybe we just haven't seen stuff happen. Like, they can just pull stuff out. Who knows? Yeah. And then also, there's also so much focus on fusion, like, the idea of, like, you just make a new gym and they can do, like, crazy stuff. But, so that's to me, that's my presentation for this is weird and random. But then there's also, like, Steven is very empathetic. He could be an empath. That makes a lot of sense. And then to go further, there's a lot of, this is kind of based on, like, the stuff that's been going around on Tumblr, like, the idea about, like, Rose, like, they were meant, explicitly to care for the humans at the zoo. So that would make sense that, like, Rose Quartz is, like, fascinated by humans. She marries Greg, blah, 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 blah. She's fascinated by everything that they do. And it would make sense that she's very empathetic, specifically to, like, people, and, like, empathetic in general, like, really cares. And it would make sense in that way if, like, rose quartz could do that. If she was if a rose quartz was at the zoo and could do, like, had to do things, like, for the purpose of keeping, like, for the running of the zoo, like, to maintain the zoo, these are things, like, the rose quartz needed to do, like, be able to care about enough to, like, if one got hurt, to come in and, like, help one. Maybe if they're having a nightmare, or just kind of see what do humans want, what do they need, kind of going into their dreams and stuff, and, like, that makes sense. Granted, that's also a lot more, like, that's a lot of kind of wild speculation versus, I think the more important thing is, like, Steven is very empathetic, though I do think there is that rose quartz bit, which would make more sense in the whole, like, why can Steven do this to begin with?
Yeah. I think you've narrowed in on the two aspects that I think are most interesting of all that, which is the, is the reason Steven is presented with these powers in the show because he's empathetic and this is an element of his character? Like, not from, like, why does Steven physically have the powers relative to the mythology of the show? It's, like, relative to the show's production and writing. Are these powers a manifestation of Steven's empathy, which I would feel like is his main character attribute, or at least, like, I think that's probably his main character attribute. So, like, it's like, okay, gems, they can do weird things. Steven's a gem. Steven can do weird things. Steven's number one character attribute is that he's empathetic. So what powers are derived from that? Do you think that's, like, the train of thought that gets us to this point?
Kind of. I don't know. Again, it's like we don't have a lot to go on. Yeah. And I think the big part really is, like, I mean, if we're going based off of, like, gems are weird, we don't really understand, there's no real rhyme or reason other than, like, they're created to do things. Like, that's the only thing I can make sense. Like, okay, Pearl is as we saw, like, pearls are, like, they're little hacker servants things. Like, they're supposed to be, like, really smart and can do things. And then so it makes sense that she can have a hologram for whatever reason. Like, that makes sense. Granted, of course, we see her use them for training purposes. That's probably not what the original purpose of the Pearl hologram is. And then, granted, we also have to assume that these abilities are not unique to our crystal gems, aside from maybe they are more trained and, like, have unlocked these. Like, we have to assume that, like, all pearls can do what Pearl does.
Yeah. Aside
from the fact that she's a really good fighter. And then it's like, Sapphire can see the future, and, like, they're very revered, and that makes sense. They were created probably specifically to do that.
Yeah. So this directly relates to this concept of gems having powers based off of their purpose. Right.
Like, it's like whatever they are supposed to do. It's like Bismuth. Bismuth's really good at building things because their purpose was to build buildings.
Right. So that's a great point. So then that begs the question, like, did Rose have these abilities? And if she does, why would a rose quartz be meant to be empathetic? ? Right. Or is that just our Rose? Like, that's empathetic?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know. The thing is, like, we literally have never, like, in the likelihood of us seeing another rose quartz, like, we haven't even seen the real rose quartz. Like, in reality, like, we've seen her in, like, on TV and flashbacks and things, but we haven't actually, like, in real time, like, seen rose quartz, which, makes sense. And it's just, and, like, we know there are other rose quartzes, but they're all bubbled. The likelihood of us seeing another one is very unlikely. I do think what makes the most sense is this theory kind of going around about, like, the zoo. Because that's the only place we've seen the rose quartzes.
Okay, get into that a little bit. What is this theory?
Well, it's that so, like, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to it, but it's like rose quartzes were built, like, they were created specifically to care for the zoo, which makes sense that they were made on Earth. They're brought into space to care for the zoo. Like, they maintain the zoo, they care for the humans, and since they're more, like, they're compassionate and empathetic on purpose, which is something that is necessary to care for humans. Not only as a gem, but it's important, like, it's an important kind of human aspect. Like, it's something, it gives the gems a little bit of humanity to, like, communicate with humans, be a little more social, like, and, like, it makes sense. They made a gem who's absolutely 100% fascinated with humanity because her purpose is to care for humans.
Interesting. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and it makes sense, especially considering, like, kind of the gem's homeworld's apparent, like, disdain for humanity and kind of disinterest. It makes sense that their idea was, okay, we have to make a crystal just loves, like, we gotta, like, this gem's gotta, like, just love humans. Like, that was, like, to them, that was, like, the only, like, It's kind of like a reverse Dalek, like an inverse Dalek. And and that makes sense. And the other part of the theory is that like the door opened once to care for an injured human. The idea is that it was like our Rose or whatever.
Okay, actually, I never heard this theory before. So roses were made to kind of like care for humans, like be the human gems.
Yeah.
And that would explain why potentially Rose has like empathy powers. Like maybe Rose can do the same thing Steven can. Maybe like rose quartzes can mind link to humans in order to try to like quell their distress. That's very interesting. I think that that would be a big shock to see this on the show. This would really take away from what makes our Rose unique in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it really would, especially considering like, because we have to assume that the Jaspers who are there, the Jaspers and Amethysts who are there, are there now. That was not where they were supposed to be. Like that's what Holly said. Like they were like brought there to do stuff. So we would assume then that the zoo was run only by rose quartzes. It was like the only kind of gems there. And it's really weird. And like, it really would like kind of shake the foundation of the show, and it would really kind of demystify Rose. Granted, that could serve a purpose in the show, especially because like this deifying of her, and like there's just so many questions about rose quartz. So it's kind of a delicate balance. We'll have to see. I would be shocked to see this happen. But the thing is, like, we've already kind of shattered the expectation. Like, you know, we have seen other rose quartzes bubble. Like, we know they're there.
Yeah.
And that's already kind of beginning to kind of wave away the smoke and mirrors around rose quartz.
Yeah, it has. And this would certainly be a way to present Rose clearly to us, like without seeing her come back, I guess, is like you show other rose quartzes and they're similar. So that's an interesting theory. I think that at the core of connecting this to our discussion is Rose having potentially the powers that Steven exhibits.
Which would be why he has it.
That would make sense. Steven has Rose's healing powers. You'd expect that
that's confirmed.
So you'd expect that Rose would have other powers. Do you personally think that Rose had the powers to mind jump, mind link, and dream jump, like inhabit?
I personally think no, because of the theory makes sense. Like, I do think the theory, like, given what we know, it makes the most sense, like, for certain things. The reason I'm going to say no, though, is because this is kind of like, granted, this could also be wrong, but this is a product of the whole, like, we have our protagonist, and when you deal with a kind of a magical mythology, we have to assume that our typically what happens is our protagonist is, like, more powerful. You know, that kind of thing. Like, Harry Potter, he's really good at, like, defense against the dark arts. Hermione's, like, ridiculously smart. And Ron's really good at chess. We have characters who are really good at whatever it is. Like, they have special talents that set them apart from other characters from, like, the norm. And, you know, Avatar. Katara is an incredible waterbender. And, you know, Sokka's a really good fighter. Toph is the best. And, like, you know, we create these groups, and they're, like, the best of whatever. And, you know, we kind of want to think that about, you know, your main character. And especially in the case of Steven, and that Steven is literally something that even the gyms don't really know a lot about. Like, he's half human, half Jinn. What the heck? We don't know what that means. We don't know what he can do. So I think we need to have a little bit of wiggle room. Like, we need to allow ourselves a little bit of space to assume that there are things Steven can do that only Steven can do because he's different. He is half Jinn, half human. And also just innate things about Steven.
Yeah. Wouldn't we have heard about it if Rose could have done these things? That's my first thought. It's like, would our crystal gems know about it?
The thing is, like, we already have proven that Rose kept secrets and she lied. And then we have, there's also the thing, like, it sounds dumb, but it's like, it never came up. Like, you know, it's like the only reason they've known she could do these things is if she told them or if she did it to them.
Yeah.
Honestly, the only one I could think who would recognize that they weren't just dreaming about her or, like, contacting. Wouldn't be shocked if we had an episode in the future where Rose is in a dream, either talking to Steven or another crystal gem, like, honestly trying to get, like, maybe there's something awful happening, like, there's some danger, and, like, Rose is reaching out through Steven. That I wouldn't be shocked if that happened, but the only crystal gem I think who could would recognize that she's not having a dream about Rose. It's not just kind of, this innocuous thing, would be Garnet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The dreaming and the mind link maybe people wouldn't be aware of, even if she's exhibiting the powers. The body swap, you'd have to think they would know.
Right.
I agree. Garnet would be the most aware. I think Greg could know if these things happened. That concept of Rose appearing in someone's dream through this power of Steven is really interesting. I'm always looking for ways for us to see Rose, and the show is too. The show just showed it in Rose's room, and this is a part of the show where it's Steven's entire emotional arc is about Rose and his link to her, and I think that Rose talking to Steven or someone else through a dream is a really interesting way of getting there. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if Rose has these powers. On one hand, she keeps secrets. We know Steven has some of Rose's powers. Steven has Rose's gem. On the other hand,
and the only reason we know Steven has powers that specifically Rose had is because the crystal gems knew about them. Like Pearl knows about the healing powers. Like that's
true.
Kind of thing.
So we only heard about them through the crystal gem. So if
we already know they're kind of unreliable.
Yeah, definitely unreliable narrators to Steven. So if she didn't tell them for whatever reason that she had these mind powers, these telepathy powers, then Steven wouldn't know, and we wouldn't know. Therefore,
right.
On the other hand, there's just been no evidence of it. So, I think it's all circumstantial evidence. The best tie to it is the fact that Steven has Rose's healing powers. So you can kind of extrapolate that.
And he has her gem,
And he has her gem. That's the best evidence, but regardless, we've seen Steven do a ton of stuff. Did Rose fly? Like, could Rose float like in Steven floats? I don't remember if we knew that Rose could do that. Can Rose shapeshift? Can Rose stop aging like Steven in Steven's birthday?
Rose is lying.
Rose is lying. Yeah. Have we talked about that theory?
No, I don't think so.
Because it doesn't make any sense, I guess. But something like that. Steven has Rose's shield. Steven's displayed a lot of stuff that we don't directly and Bubble. Steven's displayed a lot of stuff we don't directly know that Rose had. Also,
it kind of ties into Steven's struggle with his identity. Steven isn't just Rose. Steven is Steven, and it's kind of that would be kind of a point of struggle with him is what is him and what is Rose.
Logically, I don't know why Steven would have powers that Rose didn't have. That doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Unless it's just something because the only thing I can think of is specifically with empathing. Let's say if Steven was a normal human, and this is kind of going into this is crazy kind of stuff, honestly. Crazy in that it's very theoretical and it's kind of are ghosts real? It's that level of what? We don't know. There's no way to prove this. The idea that people are empaths, that's a thing, it's being a psychic. This is a thing people think and it's fine. It's just we can't prove it, that kind of stuff. And that would be the idea that if Steven was an empath, maybe the fact that he's a crystal gem amplifies this ability. But other than that, there wouldn't be any reason, unless you want to think about it in some sort of weird way of fusion, you take, you have your fusions, and, the fusion can do weird combinations of what the other two gems can do, but then they can also do things the other ones can't do. Alexandrite can breathe fire. None of them can breathe fire. That kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
So it's kind of it's dumb when you say it out loud, but it's kind of this idea of we just put them together, they can do weird stuff you don't know what you're gonna get.
It's dumb when I say it out loud. She says on the podcast where we say stuff out loud. Yeah, hard to imagine the show gets into occultist stuff the empath. But the show is a little bit hippy dippy, so maybe
presenting it in that Rose was an empath, that would be fine.
Yeah, the second point I think is valid. The fusions do stuff that Is that true? Yeah, I guess they do. They definitely combine weapons and stuff like that. But the fusion's different than the components. It's not just a straight paste together of the two people. So,
Right, like they can do different things.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, the problem is you can't fuse with a human, so except Stephen and Connie. So
it's like, who knows?
the show, I actually think Stephen and Connie is still this show's biggest rule break. Like, out of all the things on the show, a lot of them make no sense. Stephen and Connie, I think, makes the least sense.
Yes.
To me.
I mean, I love Stevani, but like it makes zero sense.
Yeah, I'd really like the show to explain that. So it's hard to bring that as a factor. You can kind of bring Stevani into any discussion like this on Steven Universe. Be like, look at Stevani. It just nothing works anymore. It just doesn't make sense. But it's just hard for me to understand why Steven would have powers that Rose didn't have. Like it doesn't make sense for like how they combine DNA. I mean, I guess like on a high theoretical level, you can picture it. But like, why does the human DNA influence the gem? Like, why did that happen? Unless it like unlocked a part that was already there,
right?
Or Rose just wasn't using it and Steven is using it. Like, it has to be part of the Rose Quartz gem to me. So
I mean I mean, it makes the most sense. Like, it's safe kind of to assume, like, you know, it's like the logic. I mean, it's the logical explanation. But granted, we're also talking about Steven Universe, and I don't know what logic is in Steven Universe. So
yeah, I honestly don't have a good read on what the show's doing with this. Let's talk about the potential negative implication. So our conclusion for that discussion is Rose has these powers? Question mark. Yeah. So
question mark.
So. These powers are scary, I think.
Yes.
Steven body swaps with Lars. If he did this with anyone else, Lars is like the most innocuous person. If he did this with anyone else, this could be bad. He mind links to a watermelon Steven. Can he do that with other people?
Well, that's the thing was like when you have like watermelon Steven, like the thing is like one, Steven like created them. And then on top of that, like it's kind of different. We don't know. I mean, we saw like the Super Watermelon Island, and like they have like families and stuff, and their weird rituals of sacrificing themselves to Malachite.
So that could just be a component of them being a creation of his powers already.
It's kind of a question also of like, you know, sentience versus like rational, like that kind of stuff. Like, you know, is it different if Steven puts himself in a, you know, watermelon Steven instead of like Lars?
Yeah. It seems like a different thing. I think him mind linking to the watermelons,
because it seemed more like he was like looking through their eyes, but the thing was he became like a watermelon.
He became him. Yeah. Let's take that out for a second. Let's talk about the dreams and the body swapping, because those are two things we've seen him do with humans. So I guess first thing is that neither of these things make any sense.
Correct.
Yeah. The dream thing particularly bothers me. I mean, it's a common fantasy trope, I guess, but I don't understand how this works. The body swapping seems like it was a little bit shocking when it happened. The dream thing, it's like, okay, like this kind of makes sense of what we saw, but I think when we saw New Lars, that was shocking. So
yes.
Steven has that's a big power, and we don't really know if Steven can control this or if it's something that just happens.
You know, is it like related to distance? Could he connect with someone who is very, very far away from Beach City? Yeah. Could he pop into Yellow Diamond's head? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, is this a way to communicate with Homeworld gems, something like that? Yeah. Can he do this with gems, or is it just humans? Like,
right. And it's the kind of thing with like Blue Diamond, like the crying.
Yeah, and he had that's a great. Forgot about that. Yeah, he does mind link with Blue Diamond. Yeah, he does.
But that's that's a lot more like kind of evidence for like the empath thing.
He does the watermelon Steven thing with Blue Diamond, is what I would say. I think that's a mind link. So because he sees through her eyes. So so Steven can do it with gems. Okay, I'm glad I remember that. Okay, so yeah, that is here on the wiki article. It was just too long of a paragraph, so I didn't get to it. But it's so this is big implication. So he can. I think that Steven seeing through Blue Diamond's eyes means, one, that the mind link, in addition to the dream and the body swap, can happen with humans, gems, and Steven's creations.
Yes.
All of them on the same level. All of them can happen with everyone. I think that ties all of it together.
Yes.
Yeah.
It still doesn't make sense why he can do it.
Yeah,
but
it's like
he can
why
do it
he
all.
can do it, but he can do it with Jem. So clearly this comes from Steven's empathy. Does it come from the empathy of the Rose Quartz? Regardless, it comes from his empathy, but that doesn't help us in terms of like what's the extent of this and what are it's like expand this out. You can see how this would be really dark.
Right.
Yeah. Could this corrupt Steven's sense of morality, his pureness?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's like we have like new Lars, and he's like, oh, he doesn't like, he doesn't take advantage of like him being in Lars's body, other than like, I mean, he does kind of like childish things, like he like, he confesses his love to Sadie, which that's awful. Like what Steven did was not good, but it's different than like, say, kind of an Inception kind of thing where Steven takes over somebody's body to do something that he wants done, needs done for whatever. It's probably a greater purpose. Like, it's not like Steven would do something to be malicious. Like, that's not who Steven is. But let's say, like in Steven's mind, there's no other way to do something, no other way to save the crystal gems, save the world or whatever. And he has to take over somebody's, like, he takes somebody's agency away from them and does, like, whatever he needs to do, like, for whatever reason he needs something. And, like, that would really compromise Steven's, like, morality and, like, who he is.
Yeah, that is a good point. I don't trust Steven's, 14-year-old sense of morality here,
right.
with these powers.
Because, like, yes, Steven's, like, pure and sweet and everything, but, like, what he did with Lars was not good. Like, that wasn't an okay thing to do.
Yeah, and he didn't do that. He didn't do that on purpose.
And he felt bad. Like he felt bad about it.
Yeah, but I agree. In a situation, I think Steven would make a greater good type choice and take away someone's agency on purpose like that. And I like, as much as Steven is like the most kind character on TV, I really would not trust anyone this young with like a decision like that. His powers are far too great to be trusted here. So like it's like, oh, are we going to go to dark Steven because of these powers? No, like Steven's great, but
it's even like different like than Aang. Like Aang's like absolutely, like, he could not kill the Fire Lord, and like he was like, I can't, and like he did everything he really could, and then granted, of course, it kind of like got handed to him, like, you don't have to kill the Fire Lord, here you go, magical lion turtle. But like, that was different. That was the thing, is like what bound Aang to like his code is his culture, and that's I mean, I'm not saying that Steven's like, he has a weaker sense of morality than Aang did, but the thing is that like the kind of what motivates Aang honestly would not compromise for like a lot of like he did some like little childish dumb things, but like he never compromised his vegetarianism, his like he would never kill, like that would never be compromised for Aang ever.
No, I would argue that Steven has a less firm sense.
Well, the thing is, like, I think it's the influence. Like, Aang is bound by his culture. Aang would never waver. No matter how old Aang got, he is bound by his air nomad culture. Steven doesn't have that. Steven is just who he is. It's not even that the crystal gems raised him to be a certain way or Greg raised him to be a certain way. It's who Steven is.
It's a great point. Steven doesn't have this super pacifist culture as his influence. He has it's innate to him. It's like innate. He has good influences. He still is growing up in America though, which is or Steven Universe's version of America, which has some super problematic and
honestly, the crystal gems, like Garnet and Pearl and Amethyst, have done things that aren't great.
And Garnet and Pearl are not perfect influences. They're very violent, and they default to violence. It's kind of incredible that Steven is the way he is. Given
it's kind of like the Lapis and Peridot thing. Like Lapis and Peridot love Steven, and like that's Steven's interactions with Lapis are very different than like they trap Lapis in a mirror.
Yeah, and it had a lot has to do with Greg, I think too. I think Steven is has a lot of influences that wouldn't get him there. I mean, we don't need it. He also like eats meat without remorse, but not getting into that. But he, like it's not. You could see how there are these non-perfect influences in his life that would.
There's more room for like if Aang had killed, that wouldn't have made any sense. Like that would have been absolute outrage. Yeah. It would have been complete. Yeah. It wouldn't even be Aang. Like it's not who he is.
Yeah.
Difference with Steven. Yes, we know Steven's kind and sweet and all these, and we love him. But And then in certain situations, I don't know what Steven would do.
Steven had his Aang Firelord moment. He
with
also
Bismuth,
went
right? Is that what you're talking about?
yes, with Bismuth, and he also went the route of not using the thing. It wasn't as urgent. It wasn't as big of a thing. But
the thing is, it's also different. To me, taking away the Firelord's bending is less severe than what Steven did. Like, no, Steven didn't shatter Bismuth, but he still like deformed her, and she can only come back if Steven or like unless she's unbubbled.
That's a great point. Steven bubbles gems without remorse. That is much like more morally questionable, and that's a lot of people had that argument with like that qualm with the end of Bismuth. But regardless of like how you think it was presented, Steven completely took away Bismuth's not only her agency but her existence. Like it's not clear that gems can even think when they're bubbled. Like,
are they even gem? Like, are they rational anymore? Are they
they're just probably
arguably they're not even sentient anymore.
I would argue that they're just frozen and not sentient. Yeah. So, that's pretty terrible. I don't agree with this moral decision. Like, putting someone in jail is much, much better than. And
again, we're not like that. We're not saying Steven's the worst person ever. We're not bashing him. Like,
I genuinely morally disagree with that.
No, I do. I'm just like. I'm prefacing to the audience here that, like, it's easy to be like, oh, they're being bumped. No, like, I mean, I agree. This is wrong. I'm not saying, but this doesn't mean Steven's the worst person ever.
Clearly not.
In the typical attitude that Tumblr has, that if you make one mistake, you're awful forever.
No, our listeners don't think that. But, So, like, it's not only is Steven potentially corruptible because he doesn't have this foundation to his kindness that would be needed in order to not have him waver, but he also has shown that he's deviated from his moral code. He hasn't. It doesn't seem like he thinks that's a bad thing.
And granted, morality is like gray.
Yeah,
there are black and white things. Like
clearly the Bismuth thing is gray, but it's it's not something that anyone's ever told Steven to question. So like he's this 14-year-old kid, why would he question it then? So I'm not, he's doing the best he can, I think, but he's done some dark things. So I don't think it's a stretch to see him using this in a way, especially in a high pressure moment. And even if not, I mean, I think the Bismuth thing was a high pressure moment, but to do some harm. Would the show present this? Would the show go in this route where Steven either intentionally or unintentionally does something pretty bad with his mind powers in a big moment?
I do think we're heading towards like we had a lot of like identity crisis with Steven. I think we're like going to table that for a little bit longer. Like we've addressed it, but like we're not done with it, obviously. But I do think we're going to table it a little bit longer, and we're heading more towards I think Steven needs to come to terms. Like, I thought this was going to happen sooner. And, I think we've talked about it at length before about, like, Steven needs to hit a wall where it's like, maybe I'm not doing things right. Like, maybe I'm doing things, like, kind of this question of, like, what he's been doing. Which we got that a little bit. Like, it's happened. But it's not, like, I don't know. It's not to the extent that I would expect, considering the things Steven has had to do.
You think we'd confront this bubbling thing? This seems like something.
Well, there's just been this like we've had. There was literally like Steven's like straight up quote unquote killed like people. Like we've joked about it. Like Steven like killed them. Jesus, like they, like the whole like Ruby thing. He has them. We've stranded them in space. I mean now they have their ship. But there's these kind of things like we're like we were joking. Like give Steven a blanket, let him take a nap. But the thing is like we haven't had that moment of like Steven confronting like the morality of what he's done, and like in comparison to like this. And granted, there's different like philosophies on like what's right and wrong, like the utilitarianism, blah blah blah, like the greater good, the idea of like doing good things because they're good, and then the idea like there's like all this crap, and like there's like a bajillion of them. We could talk about them for literally hours.
Yeah.
But this kind of idea of like for Steven, like what is it, like what are his values, like what does he think is right and wrong, and where is the line for him? And honestly, I think we are heading to a point where we're gonna have to have a big moment where Steven compromises even greater than he did with Bismuth. I think we're heading towards a moment where Steven does something that even the Crystal Gems and Connie doesn't think is right, and Steven's going to have to deal with that. He's going to have to deal with what he did, or so this is or something garnet, pearl, mainly garnet or pearl, amethyst, but like usually amethyst isn't like that proactive in things. But I would say something that pearl or garnet does that Steven absolutely cannot. He's like, I can't believe you did that. And kind of another, like, a rift between him and the crystal gems.
That I can see, because we've done this already. We've already done the Steven doesn't like the aggressiveness in Pearl and Garnet. Clearly the show is capable of that. Is the show capable of, like, questioning Steven to that extent? And I think you said yes. I'm a little less sure, but I think it's a really interesting route to go.
I feel like we need to go there. It kind of leaves a bitter taste in your mouth a little bit about like some of the things that's been going on, and like we hold Steven to like this show, we're like, Steven Universe is a positive force in media. Like it's really, granted there's the discourse and other things that I am not equipped to talk about, but in general, Steven Universe is a positive force in media, and especially in children's cartoons and on Cartoon Network. And there are some things that we need to talk about that, maybe there are some things Steven Universe hasn't really handled well, or hopefully we're heading there where Steven has to confront some of the things that he's done.
I'm not confident that the show has shown that it wants to handle the ramification of bubbling or anything we've seen up until this point. I'm not 100% sure, but I do think it's really easy to see how we would do something a little bit more clearly morally gray than what we've seen before. Bubbling is part of the show's mythology that it's a little bit easy to gloss over, like very clear parallel to Pokeballs in Pokemon. It's like, okay, yeah, this is terrible, but it's not. It's part of the innate mythology of this thing.
Versus people eat Pokemon, like.
Yeah, versus something like that. Versus something clear that we can see. I do think it would be in the show's wheelhouse to get into that, and I'd love if it came from Steven doing it, because he's this character who we see everything through. It'd be a nice twist of you build the show up into you build us up to a moment that we're on board with, and then Steven makes a decision that we're also on board with because we've been shown to like why he's doing it, and then you see the after effect of like, oh, this was bad, and like I feel complicit because I've seen things through Steven's eyes. Like that feels so much in the show's wheelhouse. Like clearly they can do this with Pearl and Garnet. They have done this with Pearl and Garnet.
Well, it also makes sense in that we in the shows that we cover right now, like this happened in Star, this happened in Voltron. You have that we break the team up. For Steven Universe, it would be everyone loves Steven. Steven's the best. Everyone thinks he's great. There needs to be something that breaks Steven away from everybody else. And I think it would make more sense if it's Steven. Like, Steven does something. And then, even Peridot and Lapis are Peridot's that was, this is awkward, and, kind of floats away or whatever.
It'd be more interesting than Garnet punches someone and Steven doesn't like that. I've seen that,
Yes.
I think this would be more interesting. Okay, last thing. What could... do we have any ideas on what it could be that Steven ends up having to do or doing with these mind powers? Like, what is the potential application here that would cause this moral break for Steven? Is it Is it potentially jumping into their mind and destabilizing them? Steven jumps into
corrupting a gem.
Steven, maybe corrupting or even just turning off a gem. Yellow Diamond comes, Steven has to do this to save his friends or something like that, or aggressively does it to prevent it, and either corrupts a diamond or maybe a well-intentioned or a lesser gem, So is it an extreme application of these mind powers? Is it okay, we've seen the mind link, now here's I'm in your mind to an extent where you can't handle it anymore. I feel like that's a thing. Or is it just a direct application of something we've seen where he influences them through changing their dreams or something?
I think it would be more of the invasion, the mind invasion. And the way I'm thinking about it is kind of something related to the cluster. I don't really know how this would really work, but kind of something where Steven, it's not that he, talks to them, it's more of he does something that turns them off, or he does something that destroys the cluster without destroying the earth. He sacrifices these shattered gems to save the world or whatever. I'm just not sure how that would work. Would it make sense? I still feel like we're heading for the cluster again, which is really irritating. But it seems that makes sense. Like it's because Yellow Diamond said. I mean, it would make sense, kind of like going into like a Diamond's like mind or whatever. But I feel like that's less likely to happen.
I think it's really interesting if you tie the cluster into this. Yeah, this is a good way to approach all of this because we've seen the cluster as somewhat sentient collection of things. So it's
it's a mass of thought.
Yeah, in some
or at least pain,
some form of sentience, and so like how does Steven deal with this? Like it's still sitting there. It's bubbled for now, which I guess takes away the pain. Maybe we don't even know.
For clarification, I guess we should say sentience is like you can feel pain and you like you're a living being and like you can feel pain and you like do things like for survival and stuff, and then rational will be like rational thought that like we have or whatever, like the humans have. Yeah,
sapience. I also think you could argue the cluster is some form of sapience as well, but it's not as clear.
Right.
Yeah. So how does the cluster tie into? Does Steven need to like get rid of them, and because the cluster is going to go off and he needs to stop it, and he just turns off their minds by incepting the cluster, and then that diffuses the bomb.
However that would work.
Yeah, I mean that sounds just as absurd as anything else we've done with the cluster
True.
At this point. But it's So I think that's also a potentially really interesting way because we have these vulnerable souls just sitting here. So and that's a hanging plot thread. So maybe that is how it ties together.
Yeah, that's like the moment for Steven.
Yeah, and that's the moment for Steven. So that's a good prediction. I do think that the way this manifests is we take the extreme of the telekinetic powers we've seen from Steven so far, or the telepathic. I don't think that's a word, but the telepathy powers we've seen from Steven to do something we haven't seen before. It's not just a body swap; it's like some mind corruption type thing. I would say.
Also, it'd make a lot more sense that we kind of have this fun episode with Lars, and then later it's like JK.
Yeah, that's definitely in the show's wheelhouse of this mood change from something we've seen before. Yeah. I think that's an interesting place we've ended up with a potential prediction for the show. I think that's just as plausible as anything else we could even see at this point.
Things we have seen.
It's things we have seen. It's hard to tell like whether this is a direction the show's headed in because we really just don't know the show's direction at this point.
It's a direction.
What is even happening? But I'd love for the show to deal with these moral. I know this is even a bigger thing with other people. So I'm going to espouse this point of view. I think it's really vital that the show deals with this bubbling bismuth and other type of morally questionable things they presented and really haven't dealt with.
Right.
It's potentially a show that has such a high sense of morality and espouses one, has had things that break that.
It needs to self-check. We haven't had that.
Agree for sure. And Steven is a really interesting way to do that. And he's go ahead.
I think Steven Universe has failed kind of supremely one aspect, and that it fails to check, to recognize. I don't think this might be kind of, I don't know, in comparison to other shows, we talk about, whether creators are aware and a show being aware. I don't think Steven Universe is aware of this.
I think they're probably building to something.
I hope so.
I'll default to giving them credit for this. So
that's fair.
We'll see if it's all it takes is one big plot thing to
True.
kind of handle all this, and how it relates to Steven is just a kid. We espouse this high sense of morality for him, and really, we've seen breaks, and maybe he has too much on his shoulders with his responsibilities and too many powers, and something's got to give here. I think.
Right. Yeah. Something's coming.
The summary of future Steven Universe, because we don't know what's coming. So
it's like that meme. There's a storm coming.
Yeah, a storm in the room coming. Yep. Okay, so it's very good discussion there. Let us know what you guys think of all this. This is something we can revisit in the future. Give us your comments in the comments section on overlyanimated.com. Give us your comments on YouTube. Yeah, I think it's hard to say anything definitive on this. A lot of this discussion is like, yeah, sure, that could happen, but it's a lot of interesting stuff here. Consider subscribing to us to see more of discussions like this on YouTube or on overlyanimated.com/iTunes. Consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thank you very much to all of our patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Alex, aka Esteban Universidad. Thank you very much for your support, as always, Alex. So, yeah, here's some other roundtable topics I have listed that we could potentially get into in the future. I have Lion Forest speculation, White Diamond speculation, and what the finale might be for season 4, which I think is interesting because we are about halfway through season 4. It's like, what is it? We don't know what's happening next. We don't know what's happening we talk about like what's happening next, what's happening at the end of the show, but what's even happening at the end of the season. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Great job on this, Delaney. The last thoughts.
Who knows? I just want a little bit more. I feel like there's a danger to being like, oh, we're this really moral, like, show.
Yeah, no, definitely want more here. Yeah. It's not something I think a lot about. It's a little frustrating of a thing to discuss on the podcast, I think. And, so I tend towards tuning it out a little bit.
Fair enough.
Also, the show's just so much morally better than almost any other show, so it's easy to give them a pass. But it would be nice to see these things.
And that's also the thing that's like going on. Like, we see it's like there's a balance between like, the show's doing pretty good, and then like also like just bashing the crap out of it for like making mistakes when there's other shows that don't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So definitely keep that part in mind too. So yeah, definitely let us know what you thought, and check out overlyanimated.com for all our stuff, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.